Fantastic. So this is kind of a good time to do an audio check, and probably someone from the audience can give a thumbs up that you can hear us. And we're going to start in about a minute and a half. For all the people who are joining in now, it's great to see all the names. Big hello to everybody.
Yeah, please raise your hand on the control panel there if you can hear us. There you go. There's one. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Just making sure you can hear us loud and clear. Abhi, you may need to speak a little louder or get closer to the microphone. You were a little faint.
Oh, okay. Okay, sure. I hope this is better. And
Perfect.
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. It's good to see lots of names from almost all over the world, and that is kind of the intention as well. We're very, very excited to do this session as the association which is trying to expand the horizons of passive fire protection grow all over the world, because we've been having a language that people have been adopting, and we want to share this common language which is code neutral, which is standard neutral, and is enabling very, very effective adoption and implementation as well as maintenance of passive fire protection. Great to see everybody. Just give us a little less than a minute before we jump in and start today's webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in and giving all the thumbs up that my voice is loud and clear enough. So hello and a very big warm welcome to all the listeners, attendees, and especially the panelists who are from all over the world right now, from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., as well as, 12 noon and, 4 p.m. in the Middle East, 3 p.m. in Saudi Arabia, and so many people who are on the east side. So, 7, 8, 9, 10 p.m. as well. Some of the people who joined in, thank you so much for getting into the session today. We are super excited to become a voice which is becoming louder and louder related to passive fire protection. Today, we are on the second session of the 5-part webinar series that we started last month, where we talk about the golden language of passive fire protection, the language that has been making a good noise all over the world. And we are very excited to be sharing this with the world now. For all those listeners who may have missed the first session, which I will be very briefly recapping, you have a QR code on the screen. You can scan the QR code and bookmark the YouTube video, which recorded our session last month. And for those of who are seeing the GoToWebinar as a interface for the first time, we have a great and a slightly different interface as compared to probably the likes of Zoom and others that people have been used to. So in case you have any queries, questions, please look up the chat button somewhere on the control panel and feel free to drop us a line. If you have questions, you can use the questions panel. And if you want to introduce yourself and share about yourself, who you are, where you have joined in from, and maybe have a chat with all the other people around the world, feel free to use the chat platform, share with us where you are from, and make sure that your voice is also heard. Before I jump into the session today and introduce the very, very powerful panelists, I am very excited to share the grand celebration that we did just about a week ago in the west coast of United States. We as FCIA have celebrated 25 years of the association, and you can see some of the images. There was an amazing light show which even I missed, unfortunately, and I'm very, very excited and kicked that we have been able to um, reach this stage and state in the world where the association has um, grown year on year, and excited to be with all of you here today. We have a powerful panel. You saw Bill and Rich in the previous slide. They are, I can say, the fort bearers or the kings of the passive fire protection or the fire stopping world. Rich has over 40 years of experience with UL and has been supporting passive fire protection all his life. He's dedicated to this. Bill, who started the association more than 25 years ago, continues to be the strong pillar of the future and the current stage. We have a powerful panel. We have Mustafa, who joins us from the United Kingdom, who has been, who currently works for a fire consulting company and has a lot of experience in structural fire protection. We have Anam, who is based in the Middle East region, works for another fire consulting company called Design Confidence, based here in the Middle East region. He's currently in Riyadh. We have a third panelist who is still kind of hidden, and he'll hopefully join soon, from India. Hemant, who heads another consulting company delivering fire protection in the Indian subcontinent. Today, we are going to discuss a key element which is part of the FCIA's philosophy of DIIM. And for those of you who have probably joined in for the first time, I'll give a very quick recap of the philosophy that has not only been making waves, but has been able to establish a very, very strong structure to design, install, inspect, and maintain fire stopping, and now extending the same structure to all the other principles and other systems which are related to passive fire protection. I'll just build a little more about this philosophy, which started, as I said, 25 years ago with an aim to harmonize the delivery of passive fire protection, as well as bring about a clear check and balance between the responsibilities and liabilities of each stakeholder. Starting with extensive work related to design, the association worked on several strategies, systems, and helped initiate standards, protocols, and manuals of practice, which are now delivering a very, very good system with the help of certified contractors, accredited inspectors, and accredited and certified and credentialed organizations whose liability as well as responsibility is very clearly explained. The association has grown across the world, and today we have members who have been able to successfully deliver a wide array of services across the spectrum of passive fire protection. Today's focus is related to design, and this is where I start inviting our panelists, and I will start first with Mustafa to understand how is passive fire protection designed in the United Kingdom and Europe or the other areas where you have been working in. Over to you, Mustafa, and then I'm going to ask the same question to the other panelists, and we will build the discussion on how the starting point of passive fire protection, though varies in all over the world, but has a common thread. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Abhishek, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you're listening to this broadcast. I think those four items which you mentioned, there are key aspects of any aspect of in terms of aspiration of addressing the requirement for fire safety, which are very important. With respect to the design and when they are starting our design, I believe that is very much relying on the project and the complexity of the project. In a normal project, when you don't have much of a complexity, it is likely that we would start designing the requirement for passive fire protection at, for example, rebus stage 2 or 3, which is basically conceptual design, and designing it and then developing the design at the stage 3, and then which you will go in more detail into the what is the product that you are going to use, and what is the strategy, the objective that you are requiring to address. However, if the project is too complex or the system that you are dealing with it has higher level of complexity, then it is not just about designing it when the architectural drawings and structural aspects has already been defined. You need to go one stage before that. For example, if you're dealing with modular constructions, high-rise modular constructions, which the strategy from the fire perspective would have a direct impact on the structural design and the architectural aspect, then for those types of projects, you do need to go back one stage before that. So you need to be involved in the design, and you need to get involved. You have to bring in your fire engineer of the job, or whoever found to be competent in terms of the defining the objectives for fire safety at this stage of conceptual designs. Because if those stages are not addressed at the beginning of those conceptual designs, when you're choosing your product, when you're making decision how you're going to move forward, then at that stage, when you're getting a stage forward, then those requirements may have a direct impact in terms of how you are going to plan for further on, and it can be very complicated and very expensive if you want to make any changes at a later stage, which then is going to add more of a hurdle for the whole project and the design team at that point. So from my perspective, it depends on what type of projects you're dealing with. Depending on the complexity level, then you have to make a decision when you're just going to bring your competent person in. So I'm going to stop here because I do like to hear other people's point of view from the other regions as well.
No, I think thanks for the initiation, and before I pass on to Anam and then later to Bill and Rich to add the value. In case you want to take a re-go at this later on, I would like the panelists to maybe take an example of any occupancy type. This could be a hotel, a hospital, a mall, an airport, where you may have practically seen any aspect from any stage where you thought that if at an initial stage, this set of information was put in the right place, we could have missed the challenges. Or as maybe Anam can address this, that how in any kind of a project you have noticed that passive fire protection or something like fire stopping is specifically defined at the beginning of the project. And what is that beginning where passive fire protection starts to getting talked about? Is it the architect? Is it the client? Is it the contractor? Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. And first of all, thank you so much for arranging this webinar series. I think it really brings a lot of value to people in the audience on this call, and it just increases the awareness in the market. Now, obviously, my whole experience has been in the Middle East market, where my projects are in Saudi, in Dubai, in Doha, and all these locations. And I think, as Mustafa has explained, the design part of the fire stop system and passive fire protection system overall actually kicks in very early in the project. Okay, so but again, it depends on what kind of project it is, and how sensitive the project is to life safety, to fire safety, and how sensitive the project is to future complications, right? So I think I'll break it down into two categories. So any project in Saudi or Dubai in Qatar, if the project is very standard like villas or residential buildings, these discussions likely start at the end of the design, which is detailed design and IFC. So during DD and IFC, they do this discussion based on the fire compartmentation line drawn by the fire consultants and other people. They start defining that at that time, because there are ready-made systems available. There are less risks. Everyone know how to design that wall and things, and that's how it's done. But since the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, there have been extraordinary demand for complex project and very artistic designs. Okay, and that brings a lot of challenge to the architectural technologists and structural engineers and MP engineers and us as well, in order to ensure that fire compartmentation is achieved. So for those projects, the idea is always find out the problems at the conceptual level, right? You know that the facade is designed this way. You know that the fire compartmentation between floor may be challenging. You can find out that there is a glazing system between two rooms. There could be hundreds of things which you can identify early on in concept design. And at that time, we can start getting, we start finding right product, right system, or right options to make sure we achieve compliance, we achieve fire compartmentation, and we also meet authority requirements as well. Because sometimes you might find a product which is not authority approved yet, because everyone is designing for future and the product are in the market, and you'll have to take an engineering judgment, go ahead, and then it is then designed, and it is then approved later by the time you reach the detailed design. But yes, especially like on a few projects right now as well in Saudi, some giga projects, there are complex designs where the discussion about fire compartmentation and how it will be achieved in coordination with structure, MVP, because MVP has a lot of systems passing through those, and facade designers who then again seal the entire gap. It starts at concept design, and sometimes we have to rely on speaking with different suppliers to understand what they can offer to close this gap, what we can offer, what we can plan in terms of design to close these gaps, and sometimes you may have to do full-scale test or boutique test, a sample test for the product. There have been some projects recently in the market where we are in concept design, but the client has raised this as a flag that there is a chance that if you go this way, you may not achieve the required test for those compartmentation. So let's do a sample test now with the lab, because we don't want to change our design later. It could be a huge impact later. So it's actually very very much dependent on every people, to be honest, like design and also client risk appetite, designers risk appetite, what they want to do early on, or they want to do it later, or are they confident with the design. So I think, yeah, all kind of stages, and it applies to all kind of projects. Hospital and healthcare has been has their own life safety challenge, but there are systems available for that in the market. But again, inspection installation part is different, but during design, I think you get all you need in the schematic design stage.
Thank you very much, Anam. I'm going to just put a bit of perspective I know that Hemant has joined in. I'm not very sure if he can listen in. I'm going to launch a quick poll for all the attendees. And thank you, Hemant. And before we get this answers collated, while there are people who are in the audience who are polling, saying, what is the group that they best kind of represent, I must kind of bring to fore a ideal view of where passive fire protection comes in. And maybe in the second round, I'm going to ask this question on how much of this ideal view of designing passive fire protection really functions on the ground. There is this ideal view that you have a design from an architectural stage where the fire and life safety plan initiates either from the architect or the fire and life safety consultant on a project which is of a specific dimension or a size. And that's where the compartmentation first starts to set in, whether it is driven by the building code of that region or it is driven by the general experience of the fire and life safety consultant involved. Because mind you, I am talking in a very broad brush. Across the world, there are countries and regions who may not have a specific building code, who go by certain guideline documents, or even sometimes by the documents of what is this building type, and generally what are the rules that need to be followed. But before I go into that second part of the discussion, over to you, Hemant. I'm going to close the poll. Very interesting mix of audience that we have. Lots of consultants, lots of contractors who are in the audience. Hemant, please share with us what is the view in India. How does or where does passive fire protection start getting talked about, if it does, in India? We can't quite hear you. If you're around, could you be louder?
Okay. To good afternoon.
We can hear you slightly.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it better?
Yes.
Is better? Yeah.
Very much.
Is it better now? Is it better now?
Perfect. Go ahead, Hemant.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for organizing such a educational based webinar. I think if you ask me a question that you asked for India, the answer lies here in this kind of that
Can't quite hear. Anybody else, or is just me?
I think same for me as
educational
well.
The passive fire protection birth is going to take place through an educational awareness more, because India specifically
Yeah, we lost him, I think, Abhi.
We lost
His
him.
internet connection must not be strong.
I think, okay. We'll probably circle back
Structure
to him. Hemant, maybe if you can find a spot before I move to come back to you, because we can't quite hear you at this time. You're on a very patchy network.
Sure, no problem.
I'm going to pass
No problem.
I'm going to pass the baton to the torch bearers, which is Rich and Bill, to shed a little light on how in in the United States typically does passive fire protection start getting talked about? Because if I see the way United States functions, it's traditionally very core driven and everything starts from the core. Whereas if we look at the world as a whole map, uh, it's it's a very broad brush. There are places where people start talking about passive fire protection almost as an afterthought as well. So we would like to understand, where in the United States, in a typical good scenario, which is an ideal scenario, how and where does it start getting talked about?
Yeah, I'll start, Rich, if you don't mind, and then you can fill in.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Abi. Appreciate being here with a group of esteemed panelists, and nice work assembling this. The D-design part, when it comes to passive fire protection in the United States, North America, if you will, US and Canada specifically, varies by type of protection. Passive fire protection, as has been pointed out by both our panelists, consists of both structural fire resistance and effective fire resistance rated compartmentation. The building codes in the USA, there's the International Building Code of the US, which has found itself in other parts of the world as well. You might find it in governmental buildings in Abu Dhabi. You'll find it in South America, certain places. You find it in the Caribbean islands and other areas. In our scheme here in USA, the building code is where everything starts. It lays the minimum requirements for fire resistance, both structural and compartmentation for any building. It's the start of the whole program. In structural, the plans and specifications both will be quite specific about the product as well as the fire resistance rated listing or design selected from the UL Fire Resistance Directory, Intertech Directory, Thomas Bell Wright Directory, whatever area where the listings might be found based on fire testing prescribed in the building code. The building code starts with two standards, ASTM E119 and UL 263. Those are the two base standards for fire resistance in North America. The third one in Canada, ULC, UL Canada S101, is very, very similar to UL 263. I'll let Rich expand on that later. But those standards drive the bus here in North America for structural fire resistance, and also the acceptance criteria for walls and horizontal assemblies, both. So two acceptance criteria is totally different, one for structural and then one for the compartmentation. The design piece, because the building codes start the process, the architect or designer, consultant, will then take that direction from the building code and create plans, drawings, as well as specifications. And in North America, we have another association called the Construction Specifications Institute, which has a numbering system that lays out where things are located in the design specification. Fireproofing, for instance, structural fire resistance for steel, and if fireproofing is used on concrete, whether it's intumescent fire-resistant materials, spray fire-resistant materials, boards or wraps, those are specified in 078100. Fire stopping would be found in 078400. So when it comes to the design piece, the structural fire resistance, fireproofing, for instance, would also be very detailed on the drawings, communicating to the contractors and inspection agencies what listings would be used, and also the product material specifications that describe execution, documents, standards that are used for the structural fire resistance. When it comes to compartmentation, that changes once you get to the communication from the code to the drawings to the contractor. For instance, fire dampers, fire doors, and fire-related glazing are all pretty similar. I shouldn't say similar. The common element is the same treatment is used to protect the breach that was made to put a fire damper through the wall, a fire door in, or fire-related glazing. So it's very similar product and design throughout the building. So therefore, you might find on plans and specifications the actual designs from a directory. Again, in North America, it's very prescriptive based rather than performance. So it's going to be specified on the plans which manufacturers are acceptable and possibly which listings from those manufacturers return the floor and the wall to the fire resistance rating that it had prior to a breach or a hole or a gap being installed. Where things change is in fire stopping. Because the penetrating items are all different, from plumbing to mechanical to electrical to communication cables to expansion joints to perimeter fire containment to exterior wall insulations, everything's different because of the change in the items. Of course, the only one that's not as much so it would be the perimeter fire containment because it doesn't change once the establishment is made. But all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and head of wall, bottom of wall, that can change significantly. So therefore, the specifier may have a specification that states the requirements. In North America, the ASTM E814 for penetrations, in the UL standard, UL 1479, and then the ASTM E1966 for joints, and UL 2079. For perimeter fire containment, we'd be using the ASTM E2307 for a head of wall that might not have a rated roof above it. We might be in the ASTM E2837. Those standards would be specified, and then it might state in the specifications that the fire stop contractor is now to go to the directories, whether it's UL, Intertech, Thomas Bell Wright, or wherever, and select the correct system that restores the fire resistance rating to what it was before somebody created a breach and put a penetrating item through it. So from a process perspective, the design sets out the direction that the contractors need to work from. Once in the field, you know how life goes. Things might change. Size of the penetrating item might change. The size of the breach might change for anything. Doors, dampers, glazing, and fire stopping. When changed, then of course a change order might be submitted, might have an increase in price, might have decrease, might have no change in price. But it would need to get approved through the channels to the authority having jurisdiction, possibly if the permitting had been approved based on other designs, or if it meets the equivalency that is not requiring approval because it meets the standards, then no AHJ approval is needed. Just a change of product, which might need architectural approval, is needed. So the design process, once it's stated that fire resistance is needed, the building code yells loudly what standards are to be used. In fire dampers, it'd be the UL 555, 555S, and then Rich, I'll let you cover the rest. But the code screams loudly the architect then communicates the loud scream from the code to the contractors, and those standards are in there. Rich, you want to add some about some of the other standards there and how that's communicated?
Yeah, certainly can. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone in the audience. Thanks for joining us here today. Glad you have taken some time out of your schedule to join in and understand how passive fire protection works in other regions of the world. So Bill did a great job of summarizing how we look at passive fire protection here in the US. And I think the important distinguishment is the structural and compartmentation protection versus the protection of the breaches or openings in that in those compartments. In the case of the basic structural and compartmentation passive fire protection, yes, as Bill said, it's essential that that starts with the codes. You know, the building owner goes to the design professional with an idea of what type of building, what's the use of the building, and what size property is available. There's various tables in the building code, which then allows the design professional to convert that into what type of construction is required. Is the building required to be concrete, steel, meaning non-combustible building, or can it be built with, for example, wood frame construction under what we call type 5 construction here in the US? And ultimately then that's the information that the design professional will use to identify appropriate UL, Intertech, or whatever testing agency design that's going to be used as a starting point. So that happens right up front. The various breaches, as Bill was mentioning, that can typically happen at the contractor level later on. The contractors are the ones who are more familiar with the, for example, through penetration fire stop systems or joint systems, and can appropriately identify what protection is needed, what specific system meets the needs for this particular building. And you know, Bill talked about the fire stopping and mentioned the dampers. You know, here in the US, our building codes, be it the International Building Code or the NFPA 101 or 5000 building codes, have very specific requirements for the protection of breaches or openings in the rated assemblies. And Bill mentioned some of the standards relating to fire stopping already. For dampers, we have a series of standards from UL 555 for fire dampers, 555S for smoke dampers, 555C for ceiling dampers, and then we also have some different types of dampers referred to as corridor dampers. So ultimately, it's the contractor typically who will be specifying a particular model of product that's going to be used to protect those various breaches. Doors, likewise, there's a series of standards spelled out in the codes. The basic doors, either UL 10B or UL 10C or an NFPA, similar standard NFPA 252. And ultimately, normally there's some sort of a consultant that gets involved in the developing the door schedule, what specific doors are going to be used. The design professional will usually look at it from a high level. We need a 90-minute door in this application, then it's the consultant will typically pick out the specific model that's going to be utilized. Likewise for the glazing materials, either within the door or as part of our fire windows, that will happen later on. Design professional will lay out what is the required rating, but somebody later on in the project will identify the specific products being utilized. So, okay.
I think that's quite a nice summary, and thanks Bill and Rich for that. And I think this is one of the things that really excites me as an opportunity. While I open a small poll, this is something that really excites me as an opportunity, because on one side of the world, we have a scenario where everything starts with a very stringent, well-defined process. And then all over the world, this varies in different parts and in different sections of the world. Some countries are very prescriptive, code-driven. You cannot begin a project before certain set of documentation is already in place, whereas in many parts of the world, projects start and fire and life safety is brought up and brought about either in bits and pieces or much later. And this is where I feel that as an association and as a large worldwide group that we can bring about a fair bit of harmonization, because we are providing a platform where we are not saying that let's pick up the standards from another country and bring them into our country. We are talking about how, as an association, we want to get the essence of a process and a structure-led approach to designing, installing, inspecting, and maintaining a the passive fire protection. So before I move forward, and I just want to give a very quick summary of how now some of the well-initiated system-led approach from the United States and several countries, where you begin with a fire and life safety plan, which is prescriptive or performance-based, and the government entity or an authority will not let the project move ahead and initiate it without having clarity of where all and how much passive fire protection is to be designed and built. From this approach, which is in many countries, to several other countries where this approach could be followed only for 10 or 20 or 30% of the projects in the country, to those countries where this approach is not at all followed. We have been able to progress certain mechanisms and tools which enable everyone to follow this approach, whether through a contract or through better delivery. So I want to very briefly talk about something called the Manual of Practice, which FCIA as an association created. The Manual of Practice has been this guidebook which teaches everyone from designers, contractors, inspection bodies, maintenance companies of what is fire stop, what are the specific building codes, not necessarily in the United States, but also as per the approved document B, or as per the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code, or the Saudi Building Code, and even the National Building Code of India, and many other building codes and guideline documents of how it is to be put in place in a contract. What is the minimum mandatory requirement to put in place? All of this is taught through the Manual of Practice. And at the end of this learning, you don't just go away thinking you know everything. We have a program which is delivered either by UL or FM, who will validate and assess the knowledge and competence of individuals through a credentialing exam of the person, and the contracting company can take on a certification by which they get audited and inspected by a third-party entity, so that whoever is buying in the services of the contractor has an assurance of a third party. And it doesn't stop here. We have a rigorous accreditation criteria that got built on this education system, that an accreditation body from United States, IAS, who published openly an accreditation criteria by the name number AC291, which can be used as a method to approve an inspection body who is qualified to know what are the minimum requirements in that country, in that region. How is fire stopping delivered correctly and how it can be assessed. So we are very happy and excited to have brought about this framework that can be and is already getting adopted in many parts of the world. And if there is no building code to adopt these mechanisms, there are whole tranches of industries like the hospitality industry, where a hotel chain is adopting the whole mechanism, saying this is the minimum requirement for our hotel chain all over the world. So we are very excited to kind of bring this to the whole world and share that on one side, we have an approach where it starts with the fire and life safety plan and flows as a document that gets passed on, something that in the United Kingdom is evolving in a very nice way, where people are talking about several systems that will drive this mechanism, as well as in the UAE, where this has already been adopted in the fire and life safety code. And I'm very excited to share that as we speak, there are several jurisdictions who are now looking at these mechanisms. There are government officers in Australia, in New Zealand, in Singapore, in Brazil, who are reviewing these processes right now, who are taking training programs about these systems and how they can be adopted. So with that kind of overview that I have given, I want to come back to our panelists one by one and ask them a question that, if such processes are available, how in your country you see that in certain occupancies, there is a scope that these systems can be adopted. I'm going to start by checking with Hemant if Hemant is still around, and if just in case he is in a better network condition, we can try and reach out to him. Hemant, are you around?
Yes, I'm here. I hope again I'm audible. I apologize for the network connectivity. Unfortunately, I'm out. But I have heard you. So coming back to India, I think we are at very ground level in terms of implementation of passive fire protection. Number one, in terms of tools that are going to be implemented at a concept or at a schematic level, where architect is aware and incorporating those passive fire measures into the design. So that's the first gap that probably needs to be plugged in. And then secondly, in terms of the contractors, or their skill set that are available to install, maintain, operate the passive fire measures. So I think these are the two specific things where codes and standard also need to play a vital role in terms of not only just highlighting the clauses, but also developing some guidebook or manuals, like what taking the support of FCI associations like yours. Those guidebook can be a kind of a tool for contractors or specifiers to start properly installing the systems, maintaining it, and then further operating it. Because statutory codes can be implemented or can be specified by a consultant at a design stage, but it is equally important that those are installed correctly and so it's maintained correctly. So I think from my side, very short clarification or answer that I can give you is that these are the two areas where India needs to work on, and I'm sure contribute or the core authorities, where we can really give handholding to them and bring that awareness level to a industrial level, so that we also can progress very well on passive fire measures. So that's all.
so much. I'm going to open a poll, but I will ask one question to Hemant. I'm not sure if you can be around to answer this question, because I'm going to ask this question more as a guide, because I will ask this question to the other panelists. I have seen in my understanding of how passive fire protection gets implemented in several countries where there is no building code. And the way it has been inching in, this is in Brazil, this is in South America, this is in several countries, even in India, where a certain type of occupancy or a certain type of project, which could be an airport, which could be a hotel, where the client itself is very driven. So Hemant, if you could share, is there any category of projects in India where you think that the specifications of the project could call in for the requirement of a process-led approach of DIIM? Do you think there is a possibility that somewhere in India, some project may like to do this?
Absolutely. I think hospitality is the first segment that probably needs this kind of an implementation. But apart from that, I think there's a lot of opportunity exists for mixed-use project, which is a trend in India. A lot of buildings are being constructed, and there is still
I think I'm not able to get everything that Hemant is saying, and it's almost like giving a representation that yes, passive fire protection is a bit patchy, like the call is a bit patchy at this time in India right now. So let me move to Mustafa. Uh, Mustafa, if I were to ask you that, what kind of segment or occupancy type would be most open to adopt a process-led approach, something that Bill and Rich defined, that, you know, as per CSI, there is standard clauses that can be got into a contract from the standards point of view. There is a defined requirement of conformity, like in the United States, there is a listing requirement, just like in the UK, Warrington Fire and several certification bodies run the EWCL and the various certification and listing programs that already are in place. And inspection as a regime is defined, and there is a criteria available of who is a qualified inspector. So from your experience and knowledge, what segment could adopt this kind of a whole solution straight away? Would it be the railways or the hotels or hospitals as a group could take an initiative and then maybe get a better deal from the insurance companies or someone where they can base proof that it's being delivered better?
Yes, as I said, it very much depends on the project. But again, and then you would start with the fire strategy of the building, which is going to define what is the requirement and what is the need for the specific project that you are dealing with. And as a part of that strategy, they would make a decision and they would declare it to the design team that what is the bare minimum that they require to address the functional requirement. Because in the UK, we have to address the building regulation, which is going to have different categories from B1 to B5. And for each of those ones, you need to make sure that you are addressing the functional requirements. And it goes to the manual of building regulation is defining the buildings in two different categories, being common building or uncommon building. For the uncommon building, the current guidances which are in place may not be used directly, because that means that you do need to put more rigorous regime to check how you're going to address the requirement, for example, for means of escape, going to require fire protection, external spread of the flame, and even providing a safe platform for fire safes as a part of B5. So if you're in a common building, then there are guidances, which is basically, it is giving you a table, sets of table that it specifies what is going to be the requirement. Nevertheless, it would highlight the fact that depending on your project, it still needs to be checked whether you need to go above and beyond to address those functional requirements. With regard to this, categorizing the buildings, following the tragic incident that we had in the UK, Grenfell Tower, a regime of gateways came to power, which are required for high-risk buildings. There is a definition what is going to be categorized as a high-risk buildings, whether it's a healthcare requirement, whether it's a residential buildings, or any of those decisions and the definitions that you have to pass through. If you are going to be in category of high-risk buildings, HRBs, we calling them in short, then you would need to submit your planning as a part of Gateway 2. And as a part of Gateway 2, you have to demonstrate that what is your plans. And in Gateway 1, you have to demonstrate that the fire safety has been an inherent part of your design, which is for planning stage. But for Gateway 2, you actually you have to submit your plan, how you are going to achieve those requirements. And between Gateway 2 and 3, you have to make sure that all of those requirements, how you're trying to achieve each of these items according to relevant standards. Obviously, based on the current changes to the guidances that we are having in the UK, we are moving from BS 476 right now in 2029 for fire resistance specifically about to EN standards, but which is a transition period from now to within 5 years. For reaction to fire, this is going to happen at the earliest stage. When you are going to try to address those requirements, there are two items which I think it was mentioned by our colleagues on the call as well. One of them is the competency of the people who are going to design. It is not about what is the bare requirement. It is the competency of the people who are going to make a decision what is needed for the project. And then the other aspect of it would be that who is going to install it. Currently in the UK, it's been suggested as a recommendation that you would need to use certified products and you would need to have a third-party certified installer to install those products, because it's not just about a specification, is also your system is as good as it's been installed and it is within the range of field of application of the product. So those need to be addressed as well. So the scrutiny later on is going to come at the stage 3, which you are going to be asked to demonstrate that you actually complied with all those requirements to address those bits that which has already been planned and it was confirmed at the submission stage or for the planning. And that is going to make sure that for the stage 3, we do have a terminology in the UK, which is a principal designer and principal contractor, which they have to put a declaration to that for the based on their best of knowledge, everything has been delivered to address the requirement for the fire safety. So as a part of those principal designers, they have to ensure that they are utilizing competent people to address the requirements for HRBs. This is not to go to say that if your building is not categorized in a HRB, you can do whatever you like. It is basically, you do have to, as a part of the requirement for HRBs, you have to address them. Still, for as I said, for a building regulation perspective, you need to demonstrate, even for the buildings which are not categorized as a part of HRBs, you still do need to address the requirement and demonstrate that those functional requirements can be delivered to relevant standards and specifications. Again, from my point of view, even sometimes when you're having a common building, being a common building doesn't mean that you don't have complexity in design. It basically means that you can use a certain guidances and you may need to follow a specific path and the approaches. So those also need to be checked, even if you are in a common building. You may have a more straightforward, a tabulated information in terms of what sort of a fire compartmentation I need between the, for example, 2 apartments, or what is going to be the traveling distance that I need. So those are mainly, they are defined, but if you have complexity in your design, for example, if you're using the mass timber construction, which you need to address the specific requirements to demonstrate that items from B1 to B5 has been addressed, then that would be something that you may need to pay more attention to.
That's fantastic. That's really kind of good to hear. I mean, Anam, if I were to kind of pass on to you while I open a poll, Do you feel there is a segment in the industry, a certain client type, a certain group who can kind of adopt these systems and would be happy to say that, let me call for this as a contractual requirement, which is over and above maybe the mandatory requirements in the country? What would that be? What do you feel could that be, industry segment?
Yeah, I think there are certain stakeholders which would be very much interested in getting these kind of procedures and protocols involved. Just if you see Middle East, it has different countries, different codes and standard, but most of them are very much reliant on American standard, which is making sure everything is prescriptive. So let's say if you go to Saudi has Saudi Building Code, which is an adaptation of IBC 2015 edition. And that means it heavily relies on American test standards. All the tests which William has mentioned, they are all listed in the same code. So you have to have those systems listed for that. Whereas Qatar, mostly NFPA 101 and NFPA 5000, and they have their own some guidelines. But again, they are not much detailed on the DIM part of it, which is explained Abhishek, design, installation, inspection, and maintenance. Whereas UAE Fire Code and the UAE authority has gone a step ahead, as you explained before as well. They have proper details in place in the code itself, and I think that was released in 2018. That means it is in practice at the moment in the industry, where the code mandates the consultants and stakeholder to engage specialist people at designing stage to make sure that the designing, planning, and preparation happens, in line with the requirements of the code. Then all the product submittals systems has to be, properly reviewed, submitted, documented. Then it goes to the product delivery, storage, handling. All those things need to happen, in line with specific details mentioned in the UAE code. It has to be examined by the site team, and then it comes to installation. So design part is there, and then the installation part where they mandate the people to inspect and certify the installation, and that tries to actually fill the gap, because I think William, you were explaining as well, and Mustafa as well, that during the design, I think you can specify things which you are aware of, but during construction, things changes very quickly, and you can have a system which you have prescribed may not work during the construction. So you need competent people during construction to do that. I think UAE overall is quite enforced on this, but Abhishek, coming to your question, I think when I'm working in Saudi since the last 5-6 years with different stakeholders, the Saudi civil defense, in terms of enforcement of the requirement and how you achieve the requirement, has taken a back seat. So what they have said is, this is the building code you have, and there are so many giga projects going in Saudi, they don't have enough time or enough resources to supervise all of them and possibly enforce all of them. So all the giga projects has been given their own rights to do whatever necessary within their regime, within their umbrella, to make sure they fully comply with the building code. Right now, in order to fully comply with the building code, design has to be perfect, installation has to be perfect, and then it has to be perfectly maintained. For that, Saudi Building Code does not tell you, or civil defense doesn't tell you how to do that. In UAE it does, but in Saudi it doesn't. But there are giga project stakeholders who are solely responsible to achieve that compliance. So it's like mini authorities who must achieve the compliance. And I think the manual, Abhishek, your team has created, and the idea of the design inspection, installation inspection and maintenance, can be really helpful to, I think, all of the giga projects authorities, to be honest, right? And all the authorities, let's say I'm sitting in the Riyadh Gate right now in their office. This is also a giga project, and they have their own authority. They have cut all the ties with other authorities. They become their own authorities, and they have they have authority to write specific methods and SOPs which they want. They can specify things, they can instruct things which they want. So I think the process which has been adopted in UAE, the process which I think the team is putting forth is a really important one, and especially in Saudi, because a lot of manpower on site doing approvals or possibly or not doing installation is not so educated or well educated in terms of the importance of passive fire protection, right? They do standard stuff which they used to do before the building code was introduced, and that creates a lot of gap. Second, why it's necessary, I would say, is the projects in so there are standard buildings and things which are two-dimensional, like three-dimensional, but vertical and horizontal lines, easy to achieve fire protection, easy to demonstrate how the compartmentation will work. But big projects, the complex projects, they are not just boxes. They are 3D isometric, all kind of structure, geometrical structures. And your fire rating doesn't go like that and then it meets the roof, no, or it meets the floor, no. It goes like that and like that and like that and like that, which cannot be demonstrated on a plan. So during design, people will put an idea of how to achieve the intent. They will advise the intent. Contractor will do the installation, but there will be a gap of a competent person being there, taking those decisions, applying judgments to add additional, compartmentation lines to make sure that it meets the intent. Because designers cannot demonstrate it on the drawing very well because of the way the design is, and contractor normally do what they normally do, and there is a huge gap which need to be filled. And I think the stakeholders in Saudi can really take advantage of this, and this could really add great value.
Thank you, Aman. Very, very insightful. We're just crossing the top of the hour, and we have kind of maybe just a stretch of 10 or 15 minutes max. And I would like to, while I encourage the audience to punch in some questions, this is a great opportunity for the three panelists, specifically Anam, Mustafa, and Hemant, who's still listening in. If you would like to ask a question to any of us as the panelists or co-panelists, or Bill and Rich, you are kind of most welcome to add to the wealth of knowledge of the audience by giving a very, very complicated, tricky situation that we can share how such challenging scenarios have been handled in the past. We'll give it a try. So anything that you would like to ask? Go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. I think I was thinking about this before as well. The project has to look beautiful aesthetically, and the designers and interior designers and architects have their own vision, which they really want to achieve. In Middle East, we often face challenges for balancing the passive fire protection with high aesthetic demands, especially in hospitality sector or entertainment sector, where the design is more people front, and more because it's a tourist based industry, right? The buy-in fire is all how beautiful it can be. How can it be better or better or better or better or not? Like I would ask to William or Mustafa or Rich, in their region, how you guys manage this particular challenge and incorporate the passive fire protection in the design without compromising the quality.
This is a curveball. I mean, I can say from a point of view that, and maybe Bill and Rich can add more practical examples to this. But because United States as a jurisdiction itself is a very law-driven or initiated by law, it's a country led by lawyers, as I would say. So every time a contract comes into place, any contract, so this contract starts from the client giving the contract to a designer, which could be just an architect or it could be an architect and a design consultant. Each contract is often very, very clearly defined as a container in terms of responsibilities. So, if I were to uproot several of the giga projects and take them into United States jurisdiction and say, how do we work now? And I would like to say that it starts with a very, very clear box. If you want an aesthetically pleasing building where the architect is challenging the engineer every day, but I want it to look like this. You figure out the materials, you figure out the systems, then it is up to the contractor or to say, this is what I will perform and this is the price for which I will perform, and to put their foot down on price. And I think one of the areas where probably in the Middle East people kind of slip or is the fact that it's difficult for people to say this cannot be done in this price, and not expect the next 5 kind of suppliers, contractors, subcontractors who can say, yeah, I will come in, I'll do it in this price, because they shy away from the liability that gets on it, and people end up veering completely off course. And I think that it eventually boils down to the awareness of the consultants or the contractors who are signing up on the primary liability of the project. I'm not sure, Bill, would you like to add, or Rich?
Yeah, there's I like your analogy of the box. The International Building Code of the USA is where people go back to very quickly to reference what are the requirements, regardless of the size of the building. I can echo what our colleagues overseas say. When the architect wants it pretty, sometimes the passive fire protection gets forgotten totally. There might be a word or two about it, but is it really paid attention to? I think that's an issue worldwide on passive fire protection. I can tell you that the sprinkler industry and the alarm industry have done probably a better job than the passive industry in convincing the world that they are needed and they ought to pay attention to them. Really appreciate Abhishek doing webinars like this to see if we can scream loudly about passive fire protection to make sure that it's thought of equally as alarms and sprinkler systems worldwide. The FCIA, the National Fireproofing Contractors Association, both groups are out screaming everywhere. 2 weeks ago, Rich and I were at the International Code Council's code development hearings. We also spoke at the Code Officials Expo, the building officials, the authority having jurisdiction. They have an association here. They had an expo 2 weeks ago. We spoke there. I was able to speak at the Construction Specifications Institute annual convention in Houston about a month ago. And Abhi's been speaking all over the place. Rich has, I have, and you guys have too, our panelists, esteemed panelists. Really appreciate all the work that you've done. But the specifications are key. The architect figuring, oh wow, I have to do passive fire protection. The design professional communicating the requirements. Those are all important pieces, regardless of where we are in the world. Knowing also that, certainly the designers involved, but, many of the manufacturers of products are making sales calls on those professionals to get their products be the number one thing that everybody wants to buy. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it creates a conflict because maybe the design didn't fit those products and something has to change later in the process. The contractor and the consultant really do have to work together. Sometimes the design isn't done right at the early stages, and guess what? We have to figure it out in the back ages. Sometimes the products themselves and the listings, the compartmentation piece, is better done selected at the contractor with very broad requirements using the test standards as the driver, the ASTM E814, UL 1479, or dampers, the 555S, or the ASTM E2307 for perimeter fire containment. Simply saying use products that have been tested in accordance with those listings, those standards, and install them with people that understand what they're doing, contractor companies that have qualifications and inspection agencies that have qualifications, and make sure it works. The scheme that we have here for passive fire protection has been heavily reliant on inspection. Special inspection is what it's called in the International Building Code, where the authority having jurisdiction delegates the responsibility to do inspection to a third party that understands what those listings are and what a good installation looks like. It's not just good subjective, it's good objective, I guess. It either is a listing or a system meets the requirements or it doesn't. Kind of like soccer, it's either a goal or it's not a goal. Not half the goal, it's a whole goal. You either missed it or you got it. And that's passive fire protection when installed in accordance with listings and standards, whether they're British standards or they're UL standards or EN standards or ISO standards. They're installed in accordance with those listings and either are a listed system or they're not. There's no real play, if you will, when it comes to passive fire protection. Rich, you got some thoughts there?
Well, we're running out of time, so I'll keep my thoughts brief here. And the hospitality industry was referenced earlier as an industry that is focused on fire protection, and it's kind of timely for me. I'm in Maui, Hawaii right now on vacation with my family, staying at a Hilton timeshare. And the one thing I've noticed about Hilton and other timeshare companies is that there's a similar look and feel regardless of where you are, at least in the US, which is my experience with timeshares. And I think that's number one, driven by the US based code requirements, of course, but it's also driven by the individual policies of the hotel chain. They all have their own internal policies and enforce those policies and have traveling teams of design professionals and contractor project managers that follow a given project from start to finish. So they achieve that uniform look and appearance across the board and balance the interests of passive fire protection with the aesthetics. So I'll leave my comments to that right now.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I hope kind of that answered. But last question, anybody, whether it's Hemant or Mustafa, or maybe Rich, if you want to ask a question about the UK or India, I mean, go ahead. Mustafa, anything that you would like to ask? Like how things are done in some of the parts that you think can be adopted in the UK?
I would say this is mainly a comment rather than a question. Is that I think before this talk I said that I potentially don't like any work that doesn't have any ground, because it doesn't put a level playing ground for anyone. It is not about the methodology and the standard that you're testing. It is the fact that there is a standard to tell you how it should be done and what's going to be the end outcome. As Will mentioned, we don't have half a safety. You're not going to say that this is half passed. I mean, either pass or it didn't pass. You're not going to say that this is going to, 50% comply, 50% is not going to comply. Either is going to comply, is not going to comply. So from my point of view, in the fire safety, either we do have the evidence or we don't have the evidence. If we have to generate additional evidence, even if it is on an ad hoc basis, let's do it. Because we are talking about people's safety and we cannot compromise on that bit. So if it is, you have a listing which gives you a certain range of application, or the bits which Anam mentioned, that you're talking about a curved system, which is very unlikely that someone actually has done a test on it. Let's do some secondary testing, which I do understand is not going to be based on E119 or any European test, but let's do an ad hoc testing just to see that how much of a deflection we are going to see. Because the problem that sometimes we are seeing mainly with the new technologies is that sometimes our standards, they are lagging behind in terms of catching up with those new technologies. So what that means, it doesn't mean that we are going to stick to our old understandings and allowing those old standards just keep defining something which may not be fit for purpose. If we do need additional testing, as I said, to generate additional testing to create that pool of evidence for us to convince ourselves that this is fit for purpose, addressing a certain objective and that we need, let's do it. And as it was mentioned, I think that there is a full cycle here. There is a responsibility for the manufacturer that they need to produce their products. They do need to get their listing certifications, depending which part of the world they are selling their and marketing their product. Then there is a designer who need to be competent to actually say that what is needed for this project. And the circle is going to be fully completed when you have a proper inspector and competent inspector saying that, okay, I know the product, I can see the testing, and I can see that how it's been installed. And that is the point that they have to say whether it's been installed properly or not. Because if a great product hasn't been installed properly, that is deemed to fail. And there is no way around it. You can have a tested system by the manufacturer, and the certification says that if you install it for this methodology, you can get 4 hours, which is great. But if I install it in a wrong way, it may not even achieve 30 minutes or 10 minutes. That is all. This is a full circle that we need to make sure that we are just closing it off. Is not about, sometimes the jurisdiction, they do have enforcement. Sometimes there are other parties, depending on the country. You may have, for example, someone else who need to sign the project off. So, but again, I think overall, what we are seeing is that depending on the jurisdictions that you are in, we may call them differently, but they are trying to aim safety of the people using the product that you can be assured of its quality, making sure that people who are designing are competent in their work and they are providing you with a sound advice, and then closing the cycle saying that what is the end product? Is it to the level that we expected from the beginning, yes or no? And there is no halfway there. So I think I will finish my part here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. I mean, as I conclude and go towards the end, and probably I just want to share very quickly before maybe Bill, if you would like to do the closing, I would like to just do the pre-closing and share that in my experience of the last 15 years, specifically related to implementation of conformity regimes, I must share that this happened in UAE and in several other countries where a very good system of compliance, which is able to close the loops of liability, has been available. Before the government adopts a system, it is usually projects and people who are fully convinced about it already start adopting it. So you already have people who are either supplying a product or supplying a product and a service in order to deliver the whole solution. And a classic case is India as a market, where you already have conformity available. You already have contracting companies who are starting to say we should get to have this as an offering. Same in the UK, there is a contractor who is an FCIA member in the UK who's saying that we should start looking at sitting the exams and taking these qualifications. So it's very, very exciting to see, markets where development is happening, where there is a desire for limiting liability. So it's very exciting as an opportunity. It gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to raise this noise worldwide, and I leave it to the audience to bookmark 12th of December for the next session when we talk about installation. But over to you, Bill. Before we close, I think we've crossed the time limit quite a bit.
Well, it's nice to see that even though we crossed the time limit, our attendees and esteemed audience has stayed with us. That's really nice to see, and really appreciate everyone spending time with us. regardless of what time it is in your day. Rich is with us at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was with us at 7 a.m. US. Abhi, I think you are in the normal time zone. and I know Hemant is probably a little bit in another time zone as well. It's really nice, and Mustafa as well, regardless of where we are, UK, Dubai, Hawaii, Virginia. The global language of passive fire protection, as you've called it, Abhi, is quite important. I think each of our esteemed panelists has mentioned the importance of proper design, making sure that it paid attention at the design process. Several of our attendees have said, do it earlier. And I think all of us would agree to do it as early as possible to make a clear communication as to what's required, whether it's the standards are specified correctly. And then, of course, the installation piece. While a building code might not require a qualified, UL qualified or FM approved or other, fire ass, whatever scheme is used in that part of the world, the code might not require it, but the specifications should. I can tell you that the master specifications that come out of North America, I'd say 95% of them have the UL qualified contractor, FM 4991 contractor in them. In the inspection world, the IAS AC 291 is recognized pretty much worldwide and has been used to qualify those inspection agencies. And that's for fire stopping as well as fireproofing, the structural fire resistance. That M, maintaining protection, that program is going to be quite good to do because wherever I've traveled in the world, the passive fire protection doesn't always get maintained. Even in North America, the building owner is still thinking alarms and sprinklers and forgetting that they have this passive fire protection system that needs to work equally as well because the building was designed with a combination of protection items, sprinklers, alarms, egress, education, and the passive. And if they forget about that, then we got a big problem. So Abhi, big thanks for screaming loudly the global language of passive fire protection. And a big thank you to our panelists, Rich, Mustafa, Anam, Hemant. Really appreciate everyone's efforts to hop in and scream about passive fire protection. Nice work, Abhi. Nice work, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists, and bye-bye now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Yeah, and I've answered everyone's questions in the question box if it wasn't seen. So you should have an answer there. If you have more answers or more questions, type them into us on the email. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good day.
Thank you very much. Cheers,
Thank you.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.